Welcome to Seacoast Real Estate Academy. In today's video, we'll be diving deeper into the consent to dual agency. Paragraph D of Rule A.0104 requires generally that an agent must obtain the written authority of all parties prior to undertaking to represent those parties as a dual agent. This requirement applies to all real estate transactions like sales and lease or rentals, not just sales transactions. Paragraph D of Rule A.0104 currently requires written authority for dual agency from the formation of the relationship, except situations where a buyer or tenant is represented by an agent working under an oral agency agreement as permitted by A.0104a, in which case written authority for dual agency must be obtained no later than the time one of the parties represented by the agent working as a dual agent makes an offer to purchase, sell, rent, lease, or exchange real estate to the other party. Therefore, it is essential that agents electing to operate as a dual agent for a limited period without obtaining this authority in writing still explain fully the consequences of their acting as a dual agent and obtain the parties' oral consent. Auction Sales Exemption A.0104G. Paragraph G provides that the provisions of paragraphs C, D, and E of the rule shall not apply to real estate licensees representing sellers in auction sales transactions. Note that in auction sales, the real estate agents involved almost invariably work only as sellers' agents, and this fact is considered to be self-evident. Thus, there was no need for agents to distribute and review the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure, no need for disclosure of agency status by the seller's agents, and no dual agency. For the unusual situation where a buyer may be represented by an agent in an auction sales transaction, paragraph H of Rule A.0104 provides that such a buyer's agent shall, no later than the time of execution of a written agreement memorializing the buyer's contract to purchase, provide the seller or seller's agent with a written confirmation that he or she represents the buyer. Dual agency status of firm A.0104I. Paragraph I of Rule A.0104 codifies in the Commission rules the common law rule that a firm which represents more than one party in the same real estate sales transaction is a dual agent, and further states that the firm, through the brokers affiliated with the firm, shall disclose its dual agency to the parties. In other words, dual agency is not limited to those situations where an individual agent is working with both a buyer-client and seller-client, or lessor and commercial tenant in the same transaction. If one agent of a firm is working with a buyer-client of the firm and another agent of the same firm is working with the seller-client of the firm in a transaction involving the sale of the seller-client's property to the buyer-client, then the firm is a dual agent, as it holds both agency agreements. However, a firm functions through its employees, namely its associated agents. Thus, under the common law, whenever the firm is a dual agent of certain parties in a transaction, all licensees affiliated with that firm are also dual agents of those parties in that transaction. Designated agency. Paragraphs J through M of Rule A.0104 authorize real estate firms to engage in a form of dual agency practice, referred to in the rule as designated agency in certain sales transactions involving in-house dual agency. Designated agency involves appointing or designating an individual agent or agents in a firm to represent only the interests of the seller and another individual agent or agents to represent only the interests of the buyer when a firm has an in-house dual agency situation. The principal advantage of the designated agency approach over the standard dual agency approach is that each of a firm's clients, the seller and buyer, receive fuller representation by their designated agent. In the typical dual agency situation, Client advocacy is essentially lost because the dual agent may not seek an advantage for one client to the detriment of the other client. The dual agent must always remain completely neutral and impartial. Designated agency returns advocacy to the services provided by the respective designated agents and allows them to represent their respective clients more fully. Authority to practice designated agency must be in writing no later than the time a written dual agency agreement is required under A.0104D. Dual agency by individual agent. Paragraph N of Rule A.0104 authorizes individual agents representing both the buyer and seller in the same real estate sales transaction pursuant to a written dual agency agreement to include in the agreement a provision authorizing the agent not to disclose certain confidential information about one party to the other party without permission from the party about whom the information pertains. Brokers as parties to transactions. There is an inherent conflict of interest presented by a broker representing the very party against whom the broker, as an interested party, is negotiating. Paragraph O of Rule A.0104 prohibits a broker who is selling property in which the broker has an ownership interest from representing a buyer of the property. Except that a broker who is selling commercial real estate, as defined in Rule .1802 of the subchapter, in which the broker has less than 25% ownership interest, may represent a buyer of that property if the buyer consents to the representation after full written disclosure of the broker's ownership interest. However, a firm listing a property owned by a broker affiliated with the firm may represent a buyer of that property, so long as the individual broker representing the buyer does not have an ownership interest in the property and the buyer consents to the representation after full disclosure. Paragraph P of Rule A.0104 prohibits a listing broker or firm from purchasing a property listed by that broker or firm, unless they first disclose to the seller in writing that a potential conflict of interest exists, and that the seller may want to seek independent counsel. Prior to the listing broker entering a purchase contract, the individual listing broker and firm must either terminate the listing agreement or transfer the listing to another broker in the firm. Prior to the firm entering into a purchase contract, the listing broker and firm must disclose to the seller in writing that the seller has the right to terminate the listing. The broker or firm must terminate the listing upon the request of the seller. If you like this video, feel free to share it with a friend. For more real estate education content, please subscribe to the channel. From all of us at Seacoast Real Estate Academy, thank you for watching.